What do you do when your people team doesn't actually have that many people in it? It takes a lot of work to build a strong culture, but sometimes HR isn't given all the resources it needs. So how do you make it work when there's only a couple of you, or even just one of you, when you're handling recruitment, onboarding, engagement, recognition, and everything else? How do you thrive with just a small HR team? This is the Culture Clinic, where we are constantly learning from HR experts on how to build a culture where people love to work. My name's Skai, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Guusto. And today I'm joined by Vanesa Cotlar, VP of People and Culture at PolicyMe. Vanesa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. First, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation. I'm the VP of People and Culture at PolicyMe. As you said, we're a digital insurance company based in Toronto, but we operate remote first. We were founded back in 2018, and we're just over 60 employees now. And in terms of our focus, it's really how we can make it easier for individuals to buy life and critical illness insurance and a couple other things that are coming out in the near term digitally. So we're really innovating how the insurance industry operates in terms of the buying process for customers.
Awesome. Well, Vanesa, kudos to you. You're a strong voice on LinkedIn. I follow a lot of the content that you put out there, and I'm excited to talk to you today about kind of today's topic. So how to thrive as a small HR team. How many people on your HR team at PolicyMe?
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk as well. And I realized I gave you more a PolicyMe intro than a me intro, but so I'll tell you more on the way as we converse. So we are now 3, including me. So I'm VP of People and Culture. I have 1 People and Culture generalist and 1 person that's fully focused on recruitment.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think, we've got a wide-ranging kind of audience from small companies like Guusto, like PolicyMe, all the way up to large enterprises with 20, 30, 40,000 employees. So, and often what we hear from our larger clients is that they want to take the best practices from small companies and some of the cutting edge stuff that smaller organizations are doing kind of on the HR side and apply those at large organizations. So I think a lot of the discussion will kind of appeal to kind of the broader audience. Do you personally prefer working on a small team or kind of a larger department?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I love that you shared some questions with me in advance because it gave me time to think, which I think is super important. And I'm happy to answer anything on the spot as well. But I think that when I took time to sit with that and reflect on it, I actually don't think it's so much size as it is type of environment. And let me tell you why that is. I think there can be, larger teams that operate in a very nimble capacity. Everyone has impactful roles. The team moves quickly. They're just delivering a lot, right? Like the mandate is bigger because it's a bigger team. But there can be big teams that really just get stuck in the politics. It's a lot of stakeholder management, just talking to this person and that person, and then the third person to get one small idea out the door. Those teams for me are highly frustrating teams to be a part of. I will say the advantage on the smaller team scenario is it is more rare to get into those situations, right? So what I would say for me, it's more about the nature of the team and the dynamics of it being a fast moving environment where you can make decisions quickly. You can test, you can iterate, and you can essentially, it's interesting because I'll use the product term of just shipping product, but you can ship ideas out, and you can get them out. You can get them out there. You can see if they're working or not. I think those types of environments are the ones that work best for me.
Yeah, where kind of employees feel kind of empowered to make decisions and to try things, and it's okay to kind of fail. One of our core values here at Guusto is leap, and it's all about kind of just embracing risk and it being okay to fail in that. We're going to learn from all of the failures along the way.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I always say to my team, we're either winning or learning. It's just, I think that if something goes wrong, there's something to be learned from it. And we take the time to figure out why, what happened. Did we actually just move too fast? Did we have an idea and we didn't spend enough time figuring out how it was going to work? And we put it out there and then we're like, oh no, we should have probably really backtracked and thought about it in greater detail. And here's how we're going to do it differently. But I do think it is really important to be, especially in startups, just an environment where you can actually try things. I think where it can be a little bit frustrating is if you get so stuck just in the ideation phase or just having the conversations, and then you don't have the actual ability to test.
So Vanessa, what in your mind is a small HR team? Like, how should a company determine how large its HR department needs to be?
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of two parts to answer that question. So in terms of what makes up a small HR team, I think it's when you have max one person per role type. So I think if you're getting to a place where you have 2 or 3 recruiters or 2 or 3 people and culture generalists or HR business partners, those are like starting to get into a little bit of those bigger teams. I think small is like the 1 to maybe 5-person team to maybe 4-person team, depending on exactly the roles and how you have it split out. But I think once you start adding 2 people that are doing the exact same function, that's where you're like, okay, we're scaling. And that kind of puts you outside of that really small team dynamic and really puts you into that kind of growing team dynamic. I say that because if you have just one recruiter, they're responsible for really all of the strategy and execution, and they're going to be the owner and leader of kind of that function. But once you have the second, it's like, okay, now they're jointly responsible. You split out the roles. There's a difference in terms of who's coming up with more of the strategy for the function. Is someone more senior, more junior? So I think when you start to have those conversations, it changes the dynamic of kind of the team type. I think to your other question about how many people you should have on the people and culture team per humans that are in the company, I think it totally depends on what the HR people and culture team is actually responsible for. And it's funny you mentioned LinkedIn at the beginning and the intro, but I actually wrote about this today because I've been speaking to peers and it's actually fascinating to talk about the different breadth of coverage that we have as like HR. So for example, are you also owning legal? Are you owning IT? Meaning like, are you shipping laptops, solving everyone's computer problems? Like, is that sitting within HR people and culture? Because it often is. Are you also doing like vendor management? Are you taking care of the office space? And like, are you negotiating leases, partnerships? Are you also managing like executive support? Like, there's so many other parts that can fall within an HR team. So I think when you have a clear understanding of like how big is the scope, can you really figure out kind of the right ratio? I always say like for me, the 1 to 20, 25 is what makes most sense kind of regardless. That should give enough leverage. I think, I have met some people. I spoke to someone once in a role like mine and they had a 10-person HR team for a 100-person company. That's like the highest that I've seen, like a 10 to 1, but their product was an HR tech product. So much of what they were doing was like testing internally. And in order to make it work well, they needed a bigger HR team to like facilitate the day-to-day of the product roadmap. So it was like a bit of an interesting situation. And then I also have spoken to people that they're like a 100-person company and they have a 2-person team. And those usually are augmented significantly by external resources. So I'm very much a very money conscious leader. And I'm always looking at like, how can we do the most with the least? And those teams that are tiny, especially if the company is growing, are generally using a lot of external support for like agency recruitment budget. So I think it's always important to look at if you have a tiny team, how is that team being augmented and like what is the spend and what makes sense to have in-house versus outsourced and how are you leveraging those resources?
With small teams and HR people on those teams kind of wearing many hats, sometimes the skill sets are outside of their comfort zones. And so what sort of tips do you have for HR people in these situations where they have to kind of learn skills outside of kind of a typical kind of HR training?
Yeah, I think if you're in HR, you need to be pretty comfortable knowing there's going to be lots of different things thrown your way because a lot of the times, and per se, I love this about the job, but not everyone does. You're working really closely with the CEO of the company and you get to really understand a lot of what's going on in their head and what are their biggest worries and things that are going on. And you work to figure out, okay, what do we actually need to do to solve this? And a lot of the times it's not just let's hire more humans. It's like we have this problem that we need to figure out and it's a bit of a different problem. And I do think the organizations that I've seen work best are where, the HR leader, the people and culture leader has a really, really good working relationship with a CEO. And it's seen as like a really good partnership, not like the people person just advocating for the people or there really isn't a lot of conflict there. There's like really good working together dynamic, and you can see them. I'm sure you've seen these too, right? Like you can tell when the HR person is like a solid integral part of the leadership team, or they're kind of like off on the side just doing the HR things. So that all to say, I think getting really connected with the business is super, super valuable to then also be able to deliver in the HR capacity to a greater level and greater degree, because you just understand the business and the context more. But to more tangibly answer, what can you do? All of a sudden, maybe you've never overseen legal or IT. Maybe you're like me and like you're usually the person that breaks the laptop, and you're like, how do we fix the laptops? Which, I should not tell you my funny stories of like spilling tea on my computer, or like the things that have happened to me over the years, but or locking myself out of my computer a couple months ago because we changed passwords and like finally remembered it. But, I usually was the person going to IT, and now like my team is responsible for solving people's challenges. So I think the best thing to do is first talk to peers that are already overseeing these functions and try to get as many resources for like, how do you do this? Like there's small things that you haven't thought about. For example, like how long is the life of a laptop? You know what I mean? Like there are best practices for that. As an HR person, you don't have to figure that out for yourself. You can do the research, you can talk to people, you can figure out that information to when you think about, okay, you need legal advice for certain things that are going on in the company as a whole, or maybe on the employment side of things. If you talk to your peers, they'll recommend who you should speak to about certain things. So I think building that peer network so that you're able to have others that you can rely on is super, super helpful for getting access to the information faster. And you can probably tell a lot of what I said is you need to figure out where the answers are. You don't need to know all the answers yourself. And getting clear on who are your resources for what is honestly the best strategy, because I'm never going to be an IT expert. I'm never going to be a lawyer. I am never going to be the person that has like all of the numbers to compare which office we should rent and why. But I have all these different partners that enable me to make these decisions.
Are those partners internal or external?
Great question. A lot of the times external. And I think that by building a good peer network, you figure out who's talking to whom and who is really the best person to connect with. And so, I mean, some things are internal, you know what I mean? Like the number of times that a software engineer has like helped us solve what was going on with like a login issue is high. But then at the same time, we don't have in-house legal counsel, right? And most startups don't for a very long time. So knowing who is the right lawyer to speak to about certain things, because they're helping companies like yours. I think so much of it is like finding the right resources for companies like yours at your size, at your stage, with similar numbers of employees. And then those partners are the ones that can be super, super helpful.
And you mentioned kind of leaning on your peer network to kind of find that sort of help rather than kind of going directly. What sort of peer networks are you involved with to kind of find resources?
Yeah, good question. There is a lot. I think that we're at a moment where the HR profession and just the field has changed from more, I think, like execution tactical space to a really strategic place where more and more people are going into it. More people are looking for community. What's really cool about it is it really is a field where we can just share resources pretty openly, because it's not like if I tell you how I recruit, yeah, you might use it similarly, but there's so many differences then in like the actual nuance of it. Or if I give you my playbook on how I onboard, I don't mind if you use the exact same thing and it helps you, because it's your people, it's your company. It doesn't really hurt us as a business. So I think because there's such a good ability to openly share resources, that desire for peership and community has been huge. So a couple more tangible examples. So we've been fortunate enough as PolicyMe to be part of the Lazaridis Scale-Up program. It's a program based out of the Lazaridis Institute. We're part of the 8th cohort, and they actually set up peer groups for all the different executive functions. So I'm in a people and culture peer group through there. I also have met a lot of humans through LinkedIn. I think when you are very focused in the areas that you focus on and post about, then you meet others like you. I was lucky enough last year to be speaking at the same panel as another VP of people. Her name is Melanie. She works at Athena, and we became fast friends really quickly. I don't know if you've ever seen her content as well.
For sure.
But yeah, and like her and I have become like real friends. And it's so funny because, we spoke on the same panel, And then there's another community called People Ops Leaders that reached out to me to join its inaugural cohort. And then I brought Mel into it. So she also met other people through that. And it's a really great place to meet other leaders, to get to be a part of a community. ChartHop has a really good one as well that they've introduced into the market. Tracy's building out Troop HR with lots of really great resources. People post about her community a lot as well, and I've spoken with her a couple times. So there's lots of communities that are both free and paid that you can join, be a part of, that can then give you access to places to essentially meet humans that are doing similar things to you.
If you want to build a great place to work, check out Culture is the Ultimate Advantage, our free guide to creating a culture where your people feel appreciated, connected, and inspired. Click the link in the description to get your copy. You mentioned kind of the strategic value that HR leaders can kind of bring to the CEO and the executive table. What, from your experience, is the highest leverage kind of strategic things that HR leaders are bringing to the boardroom now?
Yeah, really good question. So I think that one of the things that I notice is as a company gets bigger, it is harder for the CEO to have a really clear understanding as to what's going on in different teams, or to really know, like, who are these new people we hired, or kind of what does that look like? And I think that what the HR function does is have a really solid grasp as to what's going on where are strongest pockets, where are opportunities for development in terms of people and kind of what's going on there. And when you're having conversations about the strategy for the company, the biggest thing is then who's going to execute said strategy, right? And I would say when we're having these conversations, I have a very good understanding as to where I think we can actually deliver and where we can't, and where we potentially may need more resources or a closer, stepping in from someone on the executive team, and why. And I think it's being able to be at the table, sharing the information as to how are we going to actually make this happen, that is super valuable. Because you can have the smartest CEO that comes up with the best strategy, but if you don't have the right humans that are going to be able to execute it, it's going to be really hard to deliver, right? Mm-hmm. So I think having that clear understanding, and I think even beyond that, I think a lot of what I bring to the table too is helping the founders, helping the CEO understand, okay, how do we actually communicate effectively to people, and what do we communicate to them? And to what cadence, to what frequency, and what formats? How do we make sure people are aligned? And we're just in a leadership meeting today discussing a lot of these things, right? It's like, how do we make sure that people know the information that they need to operate as though they are owners, and to have true accountability, and to make those decisions that they need to make in their day-to-day. So I think that is one of the strongest lenses that the HR or people and culture function brings to the table.
Awesome. Yeah, we just did a quarterly kind of retro on Q3 and goal setting for kind of Q4 this morning with our leadership team. And a lot of it does kind of come back to, okay, so these are the top priorities. How are we going to kind of split these amongst kind of the teams? And our HR leader has insight into kind of which teams have certain strengths and which teams might need kind of some more kind of training and development.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, it's just that connection of, is this a reasonable amount of work? How is that team doing? Actually having the more regular check-ins with the managers and understanding how they're feeling, how they're doing, and knowing some of the behind the scenes of, do we think these people can actually deliver or not?
So with a smaller HR team, 3 people on your team, what are some effective ways that you've been able to kind of like scale your operation and do more with less?
Yeah, so I think we talked about partners quite a bit in terms of ways to scale beyond your current size. And I think that's a definite strategy that I would recommend. You're never going to be an expert, right? I think until you get like a very huge team, you don't have just one person that's like only doing the one thing and is a true real expert in it. So I think having those partners, having those peers too, that you can essentially count on for support is great. But to your point, like that's kind of the external side of things, right? I think when it comes to the internal things that you can do, one of the things that I always say, and I've done this at every company that I've ever been at, and I start this on day one, and I know this is a little morbid to say, but I always operate from the perspective of, if I were to be hit by a bus, everything needs to run well tomorrow. What does that mean? I document everything. And it's just even things that, certain meeting notes or certain items that are in my head, like they're in my Notion notebook. If anything were to happen, someone can access it. It's there. You may struggle to not have me day to day, but like my thinking up until today is pretty much written down. And what that means is that's not only like my thoughts for my day to day and things we need to be doing, but we have a really robust employee handbook. And what I try to do is equip everyone with the information. One of the best pieces of advice that I got was when someone asks you a question, and on the HR team, we get a lot of them, like things around PTO policy or things around benefits. Instead of answering the question, you send them a link to a page that has the information and you say, here's the answer to the question, send the link. What does that do? They have to open the link. And that means that they're now learning that there is a place to access information that's not you. So I think the more you can write stuff down and equip your broad base of employees with that information is the way that you can kind of scale yourself. And then one of the best things to do is train your managers and the leaders of the organization so that you're actually dealing with fewer people issues because you've equipped them on how to manage them. So we ran a pretty robust manager and leadership training program this year on everything from how to have tough conversations, how to delegate effectively, how to manage poor performance, how to give praise, how to ensure that you're managing your time well. Like all of these skills that then enable managers to do their job better is what saves a lot of time and a lot of headache on the HR side of things. Also, people are speaking the same language. You know what I mean? Like if we've all done the same training, when someone comes to me with a problem, they come to me with a problem within a framework, within some structure or some construct that they've already learned about. So it's a lot easier to be speaking the same terms.
I love that suggestion, though, of kind of driving people to the resource, right? And showing them kind of how to help themselves. Because we often do that on the product and like customer side, right? Rather than kind of answering everybody's questions, showing them, hey, there's a help center and here's the question or here's the answer. And you can kind of, find out more information here. And you're teaching your customers how to kind of, learn on their own. And so doing that internally with employees makes a lot of sense. You mentioned in there as part of your management training, how to give praise. How does your team kind of approach employee recognition at PolicyMe?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of employee recognition, there's a number of different things that we do. So I'm going to walk you through kind of all of them. So first, yes, it's definitely building that skill on how to do it first, right? It doesn't come naturally. It's a lot easier to point out the things that are not going well than the things that are. We're human. This is just what tends to happen. We see problems. We don't see like this is working well. We tend to ignore these things. So we, for the training, we partnered with Elevate Leadership. They're an awesome partner of ours that helped me put together essentially all of the content that I needed to deliver these sessions effectively. And then I was able to run everything in-house. So a really great partner for that. But in terms of like the actual things that we do, we use Cultram for engagement surveys and performance reviews. And there are these little cards in there that you can send as like positive feedback or praise. And we got pretty into the habit of just like sending a nice card. When you get it, it kind of opens up like a little pop-up, which is nice to kind of get that ongoing praise and feedback. But beyond that, we have demos every other week. And basically we all showcase the work that we're up to if we have anything we want to present. And at the end of those, we do shout outs. So every 2 weeks, there's an open space to recognize people that have been doing really awesome work in a live capacity. And then going alongside that, we have a Slack channel that is for shout outs that essentially you can highlight when someone has done a really great job, and it gets quite a bit of traction and use. And we also started a new thing where we do employee spotlights. So basically we collect the information from everyone. It's who's been doing a really great job that seems to be going under the radar. And my focus is generally on those people that are not the loudest voice. It's like the really, really strong contributor that maybe isn't always speaking up, but they're really, really doing a fantastic job. And we recognize based on our values, there are REACH values, which stand for reliable, entrepreneurial, ambitious, collaborative, and humble. And we look for showcasing of those behaviors. And then we essentially highlight the human at town hall. And we don't do it as like a forced thing. We have to do it every town hall. We really just do it when it feels like someone's been brought up that really should be recognized, to take away from the, oh, this is just something we always do, to no, this literally was someone that went above and beyond and like was really worth recognizing. And we put together with just like a local provider, like a special little gift box with like fun treats and stuff. And then we send it out to anyone that gets an employee spotlight as well. I think that's most of the things we do. I'm just trying to think if there's anything I missed.
It sounds like you're doing a really good job.
We do quite a bit. We try. I mean, to be honest though, like some months it's like, oh my God, we didn't do enough. And it's like, what's going on? And, we're remote first. And we get into this worry of, are people recognizing each other? Are we doing a good job? And sometimes, I get in my own head of, are we really doing enough? But then that's why having peers is really good, especially if you're an overthinker like me, who wants to make sure you're doing like the very possible best at everything. Just like speaking to others helps calm your head.
With smaller kind of tech companies, right? Kind of under 100 people, we find that most of them do, especially if they've got kind of like dedicated HR kind of resources on kind of like the people culture side, are doing a good job of kind of nurturing that recognition and whatnot. When you get into kind of larger companies, it gets a little bit more challenging. What advice do you have to HR leaders at larger companies where they might be dealing with managers that, when they look at the data, are just not participating in recognizing their teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think part of where the training is handy is to showcase that it really is a core behavior of a manager or a leader, right? I think all managers and leaders should understand that in the same way that they need to have tough conversations and manage poor performance, if they're not giving praise, their teams are going to suffer, right? When we think about high performing cultures, in fact, the research shows that it's better to reinforce the positive behaviors you want to see than spend a lot of the time on the behaviors you don't want to see as much. So a lot of it comes to like the core principles training, which I think works for companies on really of any size. I think to your point, what gets tricky is, and I worked in larger companies as well. I started my career out in management consulting at Monitor Deloitte, which is a strategy group at Deloitte, which is gigantic. And then I was a director of people at a bigger tech company before I joined PolicyMe, where we were kind of located by offices. So I think when you're in a bigger company, what can happen is just like, you don't know everyone, right? It's impossible. So it feels less personal when people get awards or recognition for certain things. A lot of the times it can feel like a bit like nameless or faceless. It's the, oh, I don't really know who that person is, but like, good job for them. Whereas when you're in a smaller company, you like know who these people are receiving the recognition, right? So one of the things that I've seen that's really effective is to try to break down those practices by smaller subsets of groups. There's like the whole idea of like the, in the past they were called like the tribes thinking or the small communities thinking, but that, really anything bigger than 100 is really hard for humans to grasp in terms of a community. So think about breaking down to those types of sizes as kind of like the max of how you're organizing some of these programs. So for example, if you're a 400 person company and most people are co-located around like 5 general centers, have a program that's by location. And that's something we used to do where I was before. I was based on the Winnipeg location and we recognized based on Winnipeg. And then Vancouver was different and Regina was different. And when you look at those ways of recognizing, people know the people within their center, even if it's not necessarily their team, right? Because if you're in Winnipeg, you're going to the same holiday parties, you're going to the same events. So you kind of get to know who the humans are. And I think that in most organizations, you can look at different ways of breaking down how these things are done to get it to a manageable group. I even think back to my time at Deloitte, and although Deloitte is huge, Monitor Deloitte at the time wasn't that big. And we all kind of knew each other. When I joined, I think we were around like 150 people maybe in Toronto, and we knew who the humans were, right? So even though you're within a very large company, thinking about how to break down those functional areas to be in a more like digestible size can be a really effective way to do recognition.
Yeah, I like that. We recently heard from a client that found a lot of success in kind of sharing results at kind of a bit more of a macro level across locations. And so it almost kind of like developed a bit of a competitive spirit among the different locations to see which could drive kind of the most recognition within a month.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I love that. And I think the way I was coming at it was more from that like individual recognition side of things. But I think those like smaller communities can be a really great way to also compete against one another, right? To your point, because so much of that is like feeling like you're a part of something and that then you can measure against something else. So I think definitely thinking about like, how do you create that sense of belonging within a larger organization to have group sizes that essentially end up being meaningful enough?
I'm going to bring it kind of full circle for us here, Vanesa. So with a small HR team that obviously kind of can't do everything, what do you think the most important things are to prioritize when bandwidth is limited?
Yeah, I think we're getting close to the last set of questions here. When I was thinking about this, I think that it's hard to say. So I was recently asked, like, what are the things that are keeping me up at night, or kind of like the biggest trends that I'm seeing in HR? And I think that so much of this is dependent on your business, right? Like when you think about prioritization, if your company is growing, the prioritization is going to be hiring and onboarding effectively. Right? Like you're adding these people to the team. You need to make sure that your company-wide onboarding is good, that your team-specific onboarding is good. But if you're a company that's not really doing a lot of hiring right now, recruitment, onboarding, that's not going to get a lot of attention. Maybe your biggest focus as an HR team is going to be this manager and leadership training, or how do you upskill your people to be better leaders? Or maybe you have a really difficult issue with retention and people are leaving your company. So you need to focus there. One of the things that I always say is you want to collect information from as many sources within the organization as you can. Obviously, I hear a lot from the executive team because they're my peers and we meet regularly and I talk to them a lot. But for me, the super important thing is collecting insights from all the employees, which is why we've been doing a quarterly engagement survey since I started. That's anonymous. And then people can follow up with me, obviously, if they want to have conversations or talk more about those things. And we look at the action items that are recommended based on those. And literally my roadmap every quarter has at least one thing directly tied to an outcome from what people are saying that they need. And I'll give you a very tangible example there. But, last year, one of the recurring themes was around our benefits plan. And it's a very common thing with startups. You just have a general health spending account, or you have something that's maybe nothing even, when you're starting out. And as we started getting bigger and hiring more people, we had more parents on the team, more people that were like, this health spending account is just not enough. We need a benefits plan. So priority became, okay, we need a benefits plan. And all of a sudden I was evaluating brokers, getting a broker partner, looking at carriers. And then at the start of 2023, we launched a full-scale benefits plan with Canada Life and augmented access to virtual mental and physical health from home and a bunch of things that helped meet the needs of our employees. And that was super important because it was something that people really cared about and something we were getting a lot of feedback on. And I will say that's the same way that manager and leadership training ended up coming up. We promoted new managers. They were feeling like they didn't fully know how to do their jobs. The people on their teams were like, hey, my manager's not that great at being a manager. Totally fair. It's their first time doing it. So we were like, we need to train people up. So we implemented an entire thing. Scores went up, and that's how you solve the problems. I think you prioritize and ruthlessly reprioritize based on what people actually need. Because I think one of the worst things you can do as an HR team, especially a small one in a small company, is just focus on things that are not related to the actual needs of the humans in that company, right? Like when you're in a small organization and every person is like very literally contributing a lot to the growth of the company, you can't afford to not listen to them. And I will say, I'm sure as we get bigger, that'll change a little bit. We're just about 60 now. We'll be closer to 70 or about 70 by the end of the year. So, every phase that we go through, things change. It was different when we were about 30. But I think continuing to find mechanisms and ways to listen to employees, marry that with what the leadership and executive team is feeling, and prioritizing and reprioritizing based on that is what enables you to be successful. Of course, don't get me wrong, you should keep an eye on trends, but focusing on what your company needs first is most important.
Yeah, that's great insight. And I think, one thing that you highlighted there as well was kind of the transparency element to it, right? And kind of sharing with your teams what the roadmap is and what you're going to be able to do and what you're not able to do, right? Because you can't do it all. And so if you're transparent about, here's the feedback that we got, here's what we're going to be able to action on, here's what we're not, that's going to help you to kind of drive engagement and retention with your people.
Yeah. And honestly, I do that every quarter. The survey is out right now, the one that wraps up Q3, and then it'll be done early next week. And then I'll analyze the results. And at the town hall closest to the survey being done, I share the results with the entire company. I'm like, here was our engagement score. Here's the areas we're doing well. Here's where we're not doing so well. Of these, exactly what you said, these main areas we're not doing well in, these are the one or two we're going to prioritize, and here's why. And it helps people understand, right? And it helps people feel heard in their feedback too.
Amazing. Well, Vanesa, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today and provide all sorts of insights for our audience. If people want to get a hold of you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I think we talked about it a couple times, but yeah, that's my number one way to get in touch.
Awesome. All right. Well, look forward to kind of seeing more of your content on LinkedIn, and wish you a world of success over at PolicyMe.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. Don't forget to recognize someone for a job well done today. Mucho gusto.